Hello, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at a simple urban sketching process. It's a bit of an introduction to urban sketching and it's going to be sort of step by step, and I'll talk you a little bit through the equipment and then we'll go through the process. Now this is a very chilled out, relaxing thing. There's going to be a reference drawing that you can have a go at. So join me for a cup of coffee and a nice relaxed sketch. Okay, so let's just talk about urban sketching. What is urban sketching? Well, urban sketching is just a movement. It's something that started a few years ago, and it's groups of people or individuals who go out and they just sketch their environment. It's such an important movement, I think, is because what it's done is it's taken away that sort of slight preciousness of art, formal art, in the sense of it being like classes and things, and people just go out there in groups and just play. And I think it has freed up a lot of people. It's an important thing anyway. So I'm going to be showing you today a little bit of a walkthrough about what urban sketching is about, and I'm going to be taking you through the process step by step. How I normally sketch is I don't normally use a pencil. What I will normally do is I'll go straight in with a pen. If I do use a pencil, I tend to use a mechanical pencil, something like this little rotating beauty. I've had that for many years and it serves me well. So when I'm sketching with pen, I tend to use fineliners a lot. Now these are available in grey, brown, black, and lots of different sizes, which is useful. I tend to use 2 or 3 different thicknesses normally. But I also love fountain pens, and I've done lots of content about fountain pens on this channel, so do check it out. Okay, so yeah, pens. And there's not a huge amount to say about that. I mean, there is, like I say, lots of episodes on my channel where I do a real deep dive into this kind of thing. So normally I'll sketch out whatever it is I'm doing and then I apply colour. Now, I apply colour in lots of different ways. I love using lots of different media, but for the sake of, simplicity, today I'm going to be talking about watercolour. Now, watercolour is a bit of a minefield, really, in terms of so many different palettes, so many different choices. I have used and built so many palettes over the last, that's one I've not even used. Crazy times, right? So, but what I would recommend if you're just starting off is buy a simple and cheap little set, maybe from Derwent or Winsor & Newton, something like that. Like 15 bucks, 20 bucks is enough you need to get started initially. And once you get a little bit more involved and you want to get something super nice, like these deep light watercolors I'm using a lot of at the moment, discount code on my profile, 10% off. Watercolor is such a good medium because you can use light transparent washes and build them up a little bit at a time. What I tend to use is one brush a lot of the time, to be honest with you, but exploring different brushes is always fun. So with watercolor, when it comes to actually using brushes, what do you choose? Well, you can choose lots of different ones. I recommend sometimes just buying a set of 4 or 5 different ones and having to play and see what you like. But I think a small mop brush is a wonderful thing to have. You can do pretty much everything with it. That said, you get some great effects by using a really big chunky one, and using a rigger brush, which is one of these super fine ones, is very useful too. So it's really a personal thing. But if you're just starting off, just buy a cheap set of synthetic ones, a few different sizes, and see how you get on. Okay, so the final thing to talk about really is paper, and as you can imagine, paper does make a huge difference. Sometimes if you're using very rough paper, such as this cardi paper, it can really affect how you apply the watercolor, and you get some also really interesting effects with rough paper. Smooth, very smooth paper. I mean, this is pretty smooth paper. You can see this is quite an old pad, but you can see you get all sorts of back runs and interesting textures that on smooth paper are going to be a lot more prominent than on rough paper. But I would recommend starting with just a simple cold pressed paper. Don't get anything too textured. A cold pressed is a good place to start. You can start in a sketchbook, you can start in loose paper. It's completely up to you. Personally, I love sketchbook drawing because I think it's particularly useful for beginners, because it's a really wonderful way of chronicling your journey with urban sketching. And I love going back to sketches that I did, like 10 years ago in sketchbooks, and seeing how I've developed since then. So let's crack on and have a go, shall we? So this is our scene here. Now I'll put it up here on the screen so you can see it. It's quite a simple scene. We've got some shadow, just enough to sort of tell the story. It's one of the things when you're first starting off with urban sketching is perspective can be quite a challenge. So doing a straight on view like this, I think, can be quite useful. It can be quite a good way of starting to understand shapes and proportions without getting too involved with sort of ratios. And because I'm right-handed, I'm going to bring this over here so that I can put that reference drawing up there. And I want you to take your piece of pad or sketchbook. Now you can do this. This is an old carpentry trick where you put your finger on the edge like that. And that enables you to do a nice, neat line all around. It doesn't have to be too neat. You can just fudge it really. So I'm going to do that. Now the reason I'm doing that is because what I want you to do is imagine that your picture is actually inside that. One of the things I have done for so many years is made my images too big for the page. And I think it's just nice to have some breathing space around those images. So just recently, what I've started to do is put a line around the images. So it's the same with this here. So you can see it gives me a bit of white space around the image and it's not too pressed up against the outside. So today I'm going to be sketching with this Kaweco Sport fountain pen. And the reason why I'm using this and not something more sort of esoteric with a weird nib is because this is more typical of just a fountain pen that you would buy. It's just got a normal nib on, nothing fancy about it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the ground in, and I want to put it in where I've got a little bit of space to show some cobbles. So I'm just going to literally put in something like that. If you were to break up this line here along the bottom of the image where the pavement is, you would see that it's kind of roughly quarters. So you've got a little bit here and a little bit there, and then that's where the main bit of the house is. And the ratio of that width of the house to its height is about 3. So I can kind of go 1, 2, 3, and that's going to roughly take me there up to the roof. So I can sort of vaguely sketch that in now. What I'm doing is just looking, observing, having a think. So what I'll do is I'll start at this side, and we're going to put in the roof line there, and I'll put that gutter in. And then we're going to just come down there like that. And then we know, looking at the roof, it's not vertical, it leans slightly back, because that's the way roofs are when you're looking at them from the ground. So this line is going to come up ever so slightly like that. And then this line's got a little bit of a kind of jiggle to it. That comes up like that, and then across the top of the roof. Now if you look at the line across the top of the roof, because it's got the way that the tiles sit on each other, it's got this sort of effect like that. And then we're really starting to fill in the details. So I'm not going to be too precious. I'm looking at the main components. We've got some lovely little guttering there that goes up to that other roof. And then this comes down here. You can see how I'm holding the pen. I'm holding the pen quite far back, and that gives me a bit of looseness, which I quite like in my drawings. And then here we have that other roof running up like that, and then about there we have the rest of that roof going up there like that, and then the pan tiles. And then there's that other gutter there. And then this bit here, we've got some other bits and bobs going on back here. There's another bit of another roof there, which maybe I didn't have to draw in, but we don't necessarily have to draw these windows in here. It's completely up to you, but I'm going to ghost them in. I don't think it's going to do any harm. And then here we've got this, what looks to be a front door. Now I'm going to use a sort of continuous line method. I've talked about this a lot in my channel. I love using this to get interesting lines. Okay, so here we've got another window. Now I'm going to, here I can just do a tiny bit of that window, or I can miss it out altogether because it's barely visible on here, or I can add it a little bit. Now I think in this drawing I probably made that a little bit wider, so I might move the window over a little bit just so it reads a bit more as a window, if that makes sense. I'm going to add in a little bit of texture there. There is some bricks at the top, vertical bricks that make that lintel, so I'm going to add those in because I like a little bit of detail. And I'm going to add in something like that for the window. See how simple that is? It really doesn't have to be anything complicated. You can be as loose and as sketchy as you want. So we've got a lot of those components in. It's really just a case of looking at these ratios now. And now I would say that that window, I'm just going to guess it. I'm really going to guess it because it really doesn't matter. And then the top of the shop, it looks like an old shop to me, is about there. Now, as you can see, I'm putting some dots in. And I'm going to use those dots as sort of reference. There are some flowers on the windowsill there, which are really cool. I want to include those. And there's some wiring and things, and I want to include that. There is some ironwork on that top window that I'm going to avoid. Right, so let's put in some widths. There's no kind of correlation between the width of that top one and the bottom one, so we don't have to worry about that. That window up there is vaguely sort of square, so we can just put in a square. Right, so I'm going to start with the lintel, just because I think it's a good place to commit. And then we're going to come up here, and there is just enough space above the window here for these, again, these vertical bricks like that. And then this window has a vertical bar in the middle. And then I'll put these lines in here just to depict the sort of window frame, but we'll come back and have a look at those in a little bit more detail in a bit. Now here, I'm going to just put a wiggly line in because that gives us a little bit of free texture to try and tell the story of this bit here. And again, we've got these vertical bricks here. Now the reason I'm kind of highlighting these is because they are so different to the rest of the brickwork on these buildings. Now I'm going to start here by drawing in some foliage. The reason why I'm doing the plants is because they're in front of that windowsill. So I'm going to put the windowsill in afterwards. So I'm just going to draw some sort of circly bits like this, and then I'm going to draw some dangling down here like that, and then I can put in the windowsill under the flowers, if that makes sense. There you go. And then the list box always helps, and there's a door handle here, but you don't really see a huge amount of that. I don't know why I put that line in there, that was a bit dumb. Okay, so the other thing is we have a cable that runs across the front. Now, these kind of things, sometimes I add them, sometimes I don't add them. It really is quite, I think I've missed off a thing there. It really depends. In this case, I'm going to put it across because I quite like, if you look at it, it's got this kind of slightly wobbly line. Now it goes under the window there, so I've maybe put it a little bit high. But again, like, I want you to realize that the sketching that we're doing here is completely up to you. There is absolutely no right and wrong. You can do whatever you want. You could put in some seagulls or some cables or whatever up there. Now there's some interesting things happening in the roof up here, so I want to have a little think about that just as a few finishing touches. So we have a slightly stepped bit of the lead work that goes up there like that, and that crosses over here, and we have that at the same at this side. I just want to try and add that in, and then we have a bit of a line, and then how I do pan tiles, and it's a very personal thing. Now they're behind this big lintel here, those pan tiles, so we don't see the bottom of them. But if you imagine, if you look at those in the middle, they are vertical, and at this side, they come down like this. So if you put in the middle one, you put in the side one, and then you do an angle that's roughly equidistant, if you know what I mean, and then you could sketch the rest of them in. Don't worry if they're not perfect. It really doesn't matter like that. So if you enjoy these videos on YouTube, that's wonderful. Do comment, do subscribe, do hit that like button, costs you nothing. Now if you want longer, more detailed videos, head over to my Patreon. The link is in the profile somewhere. For a small subscription every month, you can get access to longer versions of a lot of my videos and some different content as well, some more exclusive stuff, and you can post your pictures up there for me to have a look at, and there's a bit of a community, so do check that out. Oh, and finally, my website, which is linked in the profile, there's some of my artwork for sale up there if you're interested. Okay, back to the other guy, or me, in the future, or the past, whoever. Let's put a slightly thicker line there. And on this one, you can see the edge of the tiles, which is why I did that wiggly line up there. So there is actually a little roof light up here, which I quite like, actually. I quite like those. I think they help to tell the story. So what I'm going to do with these is, again, just do something a little bit more abstract, because, quite frankly, it's not the main bit. This is the sort of hero here. So there you go. Super simple. The last thing to think about in terms of line work is he's doing something really on the floor here. Now, if you look at the perspective on the reference drawing, you can clearly see that there are some lines pointing this way and lines pointing that way. So what I would do here is do something super simple and just draw those lines in there like that. And then in the middle of the picture, draw a vertical line. And then what you do again is just something like that. And then you can go in and add in some small details, like as they're right at the back, they're going to be really close together. And as they get closer to the camera here, they can get much bigger. There we go. So small at the back and then much bigger here, like that. There you go. And this is just, as always, the first sort of layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to go in and add in some more interest and textures and stuff like that when it comes to doing the paint layer. Now you could go in here and add a little bit more detail. And now what I'm going to do is because I want the focus of attention really to be on this building in the middle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the pen over, and that's going to give me a thinner line, and I'm going to add in just a few more bricks. Now those bricks are going to be few and far between, and this is a really personal thing. As you develop your sketching style, some people want to go full brick and they will spend hours drawing bricks, and I would say good luck to them. Personally, it would drive me absolutely insane, and I'm definitely not that person. I think if you were to put me on a spectrum, I would be the person who starts doing every brick and then gets distracted by soup or breathing or the sound of, I don't know, a bird outside or whatever. I have I'm not great at doing repetitive tasks again and again and again. I tend to find my brain switches off and turns to mush. So I like a few little bricks, even just some single ones. Like that, there we go. And that gives you the idea of the texture without having to do too much work. Right, so I think that's it for the line work. So now, I mean, if you're outdoors, what I'd recommend you do is you have a coffee, sit down, put that in the sun, give it 5 minutes, because you don't want to put watercolor on there, because even though I'm using waterproof ink here, and this is platinum carbon black ink in this pen, I still need to let it dry for it to be fully waterproof. Now, as I'm at home, I can get the hairdryer and blast that, or as my kids call it, the paint dryer, because we never use it on them, we just use it for art. So I'll go and do that now. So that's the simple line work done there, and so that's the simple line work done. And then we really want to be thinking about maybe putting some colour on this. So do we stick to the original colours? Well, I mean, in this case, I'm going to put that there so that we can still put the reference drawing up there. So in this case, I would say yes, stick to the original reference drawing. The colours are quite nice. So the first thing I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to keep the drawing super loose and super simple. Now, I'm often quite reluctant to give specific colours, because I think one of the joys of painting is discovering your own palette. And because every single palette is different, the paint from one manufacturer can be completely different from another. So I try not to be prescriptive. So I'm going to say a light blue here. And today I am sketching with these deep light. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a very rough sort of funnel shape. And let's get some splashes of paint on there. Although I'm actually splashing onto my other drawing below there anyway. And literally that's it for the sky. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want it to sort of channel the eye down into this house. Because this house is a little slice very much in the middle. Now, in terms of this cream, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of an earth colour here, which is a raw sienna. And then I'm going to add a little bit of a primary yellow here. And that's going to give me a very, very pale earthy tone. And again, lots of water. See here, I'm using this small mop brush, which they are great because you can hold an awful lot of water, which means that you can really splatter it on. Now again, I don't want to be too careful. I might purposefully just actually take this off the edge. Just break up that line a bit on purpose. There we go. Now I'm actually gonna, that tone isn't too dissimilar to what's happening in the pavement there. So while I'm there, because I want a bit of sympathy with the pavement and the top, I'm actually going to colour that in because I'm going to go back and I'm just going to add in a little bit of texture like that. Now, one of the things I always recommend is when you do a single wash of a single colour is add in a little bit of variation tonally. So for something like that, where you have that nice yellow background, take something like here, I'm using a, oh, that's the wrong one. So here I'm using a light umber, which is a good tone darker. And I'm just going to add in a few dots. And you could do this with a tiny bit of blue. Here, we've got a little bit of blue there. The one that we used on the sky. Add some harmony in. And just add in a few little dots. Now what that's going to do is it's just going to break up that single colour and add a little bit of interest. Okay, so we're on to stage 2 really. And for that we're going to be doing the windows. And then starting to think about maybe some shadows, because there's not really a lot to this. We're going to do the windows and we're going to do that sky. Now, I've just hair dried that. Now, if you were out sketching in anger somewhere, and one of the problems you have is you can get little battery hair dryers or fans, you know, that can dry your sketches, but sometimes it can be a bit annoying because you don't want to close a sketch pad if it's wet or whatever. So what I tend to do is I tend to do a couple of sketches at once, and then by the time you finish working on one, the other one's dry. It's just a little tip anyway. So what I'm going to do on this, well, not a huge amount more, but let's get a little of this. This colour is rose hip, but it's like a transparent pearl orange, if it were the Daniel Smith equivalent. I'm going to put this on here. Now I'm going to go back and probably put another layer on this because I want a little bit of contrast. I might put a few little dots of red. I quite like that. And then we're going to do this much brighter windowsill. So again, I'm just using this mop brush. Now I don't know whether you can see, I'm sort of rolling it to get a nice point on the end. And then I'm gonna, this is the only bit of careful painting really, but it doesn't have to be absolutely bang on at all. And then we can use that blue around that door. And there we go. So I'm gonna put the hairdryer on this one more time before I do the next bit. So if I'm gonna be adding in some foliage here, what I can do is I can basically just add some green to try and tell the story. Now, if I was to go in and add some flowers, what I could use for that is some chalk, or I could draw them in singly, but in this case I might just use like a Posca pen, like an acrylic pen to do that. So for the windows, as I said, there's sort of 2 layers of grey. Now you'll see what I mean when I do that. I'm going to take this blue we've used already, mix a bit of brown into it, a little bit more blue, and as you can see, that's going to give us a tiny bit more blue, a nice grey colour. And I'm going to take that grey and I'm going to add that into the windows, and that's going to be the colour of our curtains. I'm going to go all the way down here. I don't really mind if green washes up into it, not really that bothered. So before I dry that off again here, I'm going to take a little bit more of this orange and add a little bit of blue into it, and that's going to give me a darker tone. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do this. I think that will help add to adding some dark at the top there. Will help describe the sort of shape of the roof a little bit. So for this final little bit of window action, I'm going to mix a little bit of a darker colour here, and then I'm just going to go for it. Now this is going to be like that, not trying to be too careful, and then we have the same pattern here. There we go. Now as soon as we've got that, a little bit of that dark there. Now one of the things that's interesting about shadows is shadows is a darker version of the tone that's down there already. So you have to be a little bit careful of not just doing shadows as greys or pinks or whatever. But I wanted to keep this super simple, so I'm going to resist the temptation to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to add in just a couple of pops of colour for those flowers. So here I've got some Posca pens that I like to use for urban sketching, and I can add in a few little dots of just colour. Now this is quite a small image, so you maybe won't see a lot of the sort of detail here, but I think it's fun just sort of suggesting, you know, hinting at maybe some nice bright colours. So let's have a bit of a close-up. So you can see there some of the details in the window, those little pops of colour I've put in, and then further up how that roof is looking with the shadow across it, and then some of the shadows that are coming down under various elements there. Now I've obviously not coloured around it. I think that's nice, it gives it a little bit of space to breathe. So what I'm going to do last of all is just rub out this pencil line here. And we don't need that. So that's it for the super simple urban sketch. Now there is a couple of things that are left to do here. One of them is sign your work. I would always recommend doing that. If nothing else, I think it gives a sense of like a finished thing. Signature on this door. Sometimes I do a little, that looks like a little cat flap. Sometimes I colour it in so it's dark. So I don't want it to have too much impact, but I want it to be there. So I'm going to leave that there. Now, I hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll hopefully see you next time. Cheers then. Bye bye.